Welcome to the Unscripted podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. Today, you're going to hear 5 best practices for building your business case for service investment. I am happy to be joined today by Carrie Toth, who is the Vice President of Customer Experience at Generac Power Systems. Carrie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here. So, before we get into these best practices, tell everyone a little bit more about yourself, your background, your role, Generac's business, whatever you would like to share.
Sounds good. So, a little bit about me. I've worked for a handful of companies in my career, and some of them have been really highly engineered products, some of them have been commodity-based products. I've worked in kind of more channel-based B2B. I've worked in some B2C. So, I've had a lot of different experiences throughout my career. The red thread that kind of went through all of those was that I always owned kind of service or support teams. So this function is a little bit unique in that it reports up differently in almost every organization. So when I've reported to a sales leader, I've had additional functions like inside sales, pricing, forecasting. When I get into more of an ops background, I've had distribution and logistics and S&OP in the bundle, but there's always been a service and support kind of piece that has followed me through my career. I like to say I get to do everything that nobody else wants to do. And then I've made a career out of doing that. All joking aside, I work at Generac and my teams there are responsible for kind of the consumer pieces, pre and post sale. So we have 24/7 support for technical, troubleshooting. We also have people on standby to help you select the right products and get into the right solutions to help with your power needs. And I've been there for about 3 years. It's an exciting growth company, lots of opportunity with kind of grid issues as well as weather related issues, and even more recent use cases emerging with more people working from home, have changed the landscape around kind of the products and the markets that we serve. So it's an exciting company and an exciting role, and I've really enjoyed it and happy to share today.
Yeah, excellent. The point you made is a good one that, we've had conversations on the podcast before about like what is the ideal structure for service within an organization? And I don't think there's, a one size fits all answer to that. But to your point, in different businesses, it can sit many different places. And that um, structure, adds a certain tone or a certain flavor to, how services run, what other responsibilities, you might end up having, et cetera. And so, keeping in mind, that you have had experiences in organizations that have done that a bit differently, through those experiences, you've sort of, you know, collected some opinions, some, best practices around, how to set yourself up for success in advocating for investment for the service function. So those are what we're going to talk through. So number one is assessing the broader organization. So observing and endearing before acting. So talk a little bit about the importance of that.
Yeah, and I would say I haven't always been endearing, that's for sure. But I try hard, especially when I'm new to an organization. No, but we're really focused on listening when I come in. That's one of the really important things because I find that the company culture, cultures can be around growth, cultures can be around cost out, cultures can have many different dynamic elements. And if you don't understand those, it's really hard to frame a roadmap for your team that matches with those cultural aspects as well as the business objectives. And then you're just fighting a battle all the time of what you want for your team and how to make a compelling argument and business case. So for me, like when I join an organization, it's really important to do skip levels with my team and also peers and then upwards to understand what is the brand of the team,
Mm-hmm.
How do people feel about it? I've done things like taken sales leaders to, visual boards where we display metrics and say, what do you think about these metrics? Are these the right goals that you think we should be working on? It doesn't need to be this service level, or should it be this service level? Sometimes I find that we're overinvested and we're trying to achieve something sales isn't even asking for,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is a very costly proposition. Other times it's not even the right metric, right? So calibrating that the team is working on the right things and has the right goals is kind of one big thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then understanding what's important to those people and what they think we're good at already versus where they think we need to improve, lets me kind of create this 360 view of what am I learning versus what do a variety of stakeholders, including the employees, really think. And then that allows me just to shape a here's our short-term game plan and what we're going to do to get aligned while we create a long-term roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been really successful because people understand that you're listening. And here's what
Mm-hmm.
I heard from different parts of the organization. And sometimes you're shedding light on a disconnect between the team and other groups for the team or for other groups. And you're at least positioning yourself as I want to calibrate with you. I want to be a partner with you to peers and other stakeholders in the organization. And that's
Mm-hmm.
no matter who you are, it's well received, right?
Yeah.
And I often give the book the first 90 days still to new employees or people that have been recently promoted, so they're reminded to yes, people want quick action, but sometimes quick action is just I listened to a lot of people and assessed very quickly, not I changed and did a lot of things very quickly beyond that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point because you need to make sure the action is, really aligned to where the challenges and opportunities lie. And if you
Mm-hmm.
just come in, hot, and you
Yep.
don't take the time to understand that, you're not really sure if your ideas or opinions are as accurate as they need to be. So the second best practice is to take that knowledge that you're building through this sort of assessment, listening, observing, getting to know the stakeholders, et cetera, and using that knowledge to build relevance and visibility to earn your voice. So, can you talk a little bit about then that transition from like gathering that insight to using it to kind of solidify your place and everything?
Yeah, I think it depends on what level you are in the organization, right? Of how you would do that. Depending on where you are, it could be, understanding the cadence of the business and the forums where you should be plugged in. And how do you get involved in the right initiatives that are already in motion versus creating a bunch of new ones always, right? And sometimes your agenda, like getting a new CRM or putting AI on the team, things that you want to do for your team can plug into things that are already there. Versus it seems like new work, something extra to a business that already has a roadmap, already has a strategic plan, depending on what time of year, you're joining, right? And they've already funded certain initiatives.
Hmm.
So I think it's like taking stock of not just what people think of the team, but also what they're working on and what they've already determined is important and where can you hook in. And sometimes for me, that's like change the priority list. Like I might think I need 7 things for the team. Like, okay, I need to do these 7 things over the next year for this to be successful. However, I might need to do number 7 before number 1 based on what the team's already working on, funded, resourced, etc.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's an internal battle with yourself that we
Hmm.
should be doing number 1. I don't know why we're doing this, right? You go home pulling your hair out, but really it's like understanding that as long as we get to that end point, sometimes it doesn't matter like which road you take to get there. It's that
Hmm.
you know where the end point is and have alignment on the end point. And
Yeah.
then you can practice that agility and flexibility and kind of ebbing and flowing with the organization and what's already in place. And then hopefully you're there when strategic planning is happening and you can get your voice, heard and craft some of those initiatives so that service and support and some of those functions are top of mind, where
Hmm.
before you might be kind of hooking in in trying to get, you know, a seat at the table, right?
Yeah. So the third best practice is to practice smart storytelling. So tell us about this.
Yeah. So I would say that this is really understanding your audience and, you know, something like, for example, at Generac, it's a growth company, right? So it's really focused on growth and new customer acquisition and how do we upsell, cross sell, right? Which are great things to focus on, right? But I need a lot of foundational things on the team too, that we just need, right, to
Hmm.
progress the function. So for me, it's like finding ways to be relevant are positioning yourself for that growth initiative. So if we want to grow, I'm going to focus on how does post sale, for example, sell new equipment. And that might not be what I think is the team's number one mission, but it's a mission that's relevant. It's a story that resonates and it hooks into what other people have prioritized already. So then if I can frame things that I need inside of delivering growth, and I actually deliver it, but I also can add to it the additional pieces that benefit the team overall and more foundationally, then everybody wins, right?
Hmm.
So it's a little bit more of an art than a science, though, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, this has come up a number of times when we talk about this idea of sometimes service leaders not having a seat at the table
Yeah.
is, you know, using storytelling and getting good at speaking the language of the rest of the business instead of expecting them to understand the language of service, right? So making
Yes.
sure that you're, you know, just like you said, observing what is most important and then, using that to storytell in a way that ties in what service is, what it does, what it means to that broader business in a way that they'll understand, right? I think a lot of
Yep.
times that frustration is exacerbated by leaders that, don't have that art, aren't good at that art. So they keep saying the same things in the same
Yes.
language that aren't
Yes.
hitting home. And then that frustration grows, right? So
Yep.
yeah, yeah, that's really interesting.
I think sometimes you have to learn that the hard way, right?
Hmm.
Because what works in one business might not be that love language of the next business, right?
Hmm.
Like you have to find that out a little bit through trial and error sometimes. So I remember talking to our leadership team about upsell, cross sell, and the value of that, right? And trying to quantify the value. And I remember hearing back, like, I don't care about this use case, these numbers. I care about what experience you had. And I believe you and what your teams did before, but not this data or this industry information or this vendor data, whatever, right? And then, like, it's a light bulb goes off. Okay, if they believe me, I can show them what that looks like here. And
Hmm.
that's where I started to really get into like this pilot scenario, right? And I learned how to do this really well when I was at Paul Company, which is part of Danaher, is, if you're in a Danaher business, they will not buy tools until you prove to them that these can be successful before you get the tools. So you need to
Hmm.
prove this with like paper clips and duct tape first, show them results, and then they believe, right? Which is fine, but now that's kind of ingrained. So now let's pilot this. It doesn't matter if it's manual or difficult or perfect. How do we show that we can get points on the board in this scenario to then extrapolate that out and show the vision with some early or small results? And that's really, really believable to leaders, even
Hmm.
myself, to say, okay, I believe you can do that because you showed me, even if it was on a small scale, and now I'll invest
Hmm.
versus just keep asking for this really ambiguous request or using industry data or vendor data that they've provided you sometimes isn't believable. And they think, we think our market's different, we think our industry is different, we think our customers different. And sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. But
Hmm.
let's prove it here and then people will believe you and then they'll
Hmm.
start to invest, right? And that's a way to talk the language is to show results in a small but meaningful way
Yeah.
also.
Yeah. And so I think that ties in with our next best practice, which is the idea of land and expand. So, you know, understanding what's most important to the business, providing value around that so you can then, ask for some of what you want or what you need. So, can you talk about that aspect a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of goes back to the pilot scenario. Like, I've done a lot of pilots on my team where my team would say things like, well, why are we working on this when this is the bigger opportunity? And teaching them that, okay, if we can sell that, we can find lead gen in post sale for new equipment, that's free lead gen compared
Mm-hmm.
to what we pay for media or digital advertising, or name the piece of lead gen that you're funding. Here's customers calling in every single day, right? So let's take this small opportunity and show what we can do to contribute to new equipment growth. And then as they're excited about that because it's real, then we can say, hey, to do more of this, we
Mm-hmm.
need an upgrade to the CRM, or we need a consumer data platform that'll show us this so we can have a more elegant conversation, or we need screen sharing that'll allow us to see their old equipment and position it to the right customers at the right time, or AI lead scoring, whatever the tool is that we're trying to get, it'll benefit us for post sale support as an example, but we frame it in the pre sale context. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just because that's what the Generac love language is, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
growth. But if it's a different company and it's more about efficiency, that could be a flip flop scenario, right? If I'm inside sales, but they like the productivity scenario, then show them how you go get productivity to get tools that will help you with growth as well. So I think it works both ways, but it's all about like carving out test and learn time maybe in
Mm-hmm.
your team versus just big impact programs or projects, so that you can then hook and like pull in other initiatives, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because quite frankly, in service and support, it's a foundational tool set that we need that will work for any scenario that you're pretty much on the phone or on site with. So whether you're using that for growth, productivity, upsell, cross, doesn't really matter, right? Where you
Mm-hmm.
start, you're trying to get to the same end place, right?
Yeah. It really ties back to storytelling again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because to your
Mm-hmm.
point, the tool that you're investing in is going to impact all areas of the function, but you're emphasizing the piece of that impact that the stakeholders care most about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So the fifth or last best practice is remaining agile. So you talked about the idea of marrying lean methodology and common sense. So talk about that union.
Yeah, so there's a couple different pieces here. So I would say that most businesses still have some type of continuous improvement team, right? And historically, they're more plant-based resources or people that might be a headquarters team that get farmed out to a variety of ops teams to drive productivity, right? And a lot of companies still do back office type work with lean, but you're always begging for those resources because the plant has so many different needs, right? So I've just found in my career that I always lose to the plant. So for me, it's a non negotiable when you have a large team of a couple hundred people and very complex processes. And traditionally, these teams are working in many different systems, right? They're in the ultimate swivel chair scenarios.
Hmm.
So to work on process and lean is so meaningful for productivity and for the employee experience, right? So I've always had a dedicated CI leader, and it's one of the things that I like to call like a secret weapon, maybe, or a secret sauce to say, like, hey, this is non negotiable because it's so complex and so big, and I can't afford to wait in line or be bumped in line. And I can do 10 times for you, the amount of savings or growth or whatever, retention for the business if I have this resource that cuts
Hmm.
across. The other thing about lean for me is it's a cultural piece. So I can't be in every meeting as we're teaching people a culture to find waste, remove waste, and think about things in a different light. So having that CI leader or team on the team, they're infused in a lot of different cadence meetings, huddles, stand-ups, project reviews, and that allows them to work on the cultural pieces, sometimes bringing a leadership team along, but
Hmm.
sometimes just teaching kind of an agent workforce as well. So I think having a dedicated person and using those tools consistently and for culture is key. I think the other part of that is like knowing how much to use them, right? So like I'm not a lean expert. I could probably lead a Kaizen event, but it would be pretty clunky. And a lot of people would probably say, I don't know about this one. But what I would say is I know when to get which tool based on what the problem is. And when I know the tool, I can get the person that knows how to use that tool to lead the team to success. And
Hmm.
that's the secret, is not necessarily being the executor yourself. It's knowing which tool to pull out, and then
Hmm.
how not to overdo it. Sometimes lean, just Six Sigma, all these tools are way over processed or super rigid, and it becomes more about filling out forms or doing all these process steps to be able to say it was a Kaizen or it was a problem solving event, or pick your poison. And it really loses sight of what you're trying to achieve. So I like to say we use lean with a heavy dose of common sense.
Hmm.
When we stop, we stop. If we need to go 2/3 in to get the data and that's enough to make a decision, we will do that. If we need to go 100, we will do that. But it really helps to have people that understand how far do you need to go to solve the problem and to get to root cause versus overinvest
Hmm.
or get away from the reason you're doing it, and just become kind of about a paper process and not really a culture and, results.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a bit of a delicate balance, right?
Yes.
I think, going back to what you said about the relevance of having that person on your team, the service landscape is complex. It's also at this point ever changing, right? So it's
Yes.
there is this need to continually understand and orchestrate and refine and review and not, if you go back 10 years, you could optimize processes or optimize whatever, right? And then
Yeah.
expect that it will stay optimized for a period of time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way to not have that be an ongoing practice in
Yes.
today's landscape. But I also like the point about not over engineering it to a point where a function that is intended to help you be agile becomes one that slows you down,
A barrier.
or
Yeah.
right, or frustrates people that have enough
Yep.
on their plate already. So yeah, um it sounds like getting that balance right can also be an area where it's more art than science, you know what I
I
mean?
think
Or
so.
but
I think so.
yeah, but I understand, the point of the value of having that embedded in the team and in the culture, but also not overdoing it,
Yeah, and
not.
I think people at first don't understand, right? If you haven't lived in a service or support world, it's really, I remember, joining a team and the ops leader was, my boss, and him saying, "We already have a CI team. You don't need a CI leader." And I'm like, "No, let me help you understand what that looks like to me," because sometimes it takes a little bit of selling in the types of things this person would do, bringing them to life to help people understand. So it may not happen day one. You might have to check out somebody from that corporate team and do some events very quickly in succession and then show I can deliver more of these if I had my own person and I didn't have to wait in line, or I didn't only get someone twice a year. I need to be doing one of these every month or every week, or
Hmm.
hey, my team's struggling with this when we leave a Kaizen because I don't have someone there to help drive the culture and be in the daily huddles and teach the practices. So I think sometimes you can't come with it. You have to prove it and then ask for it. But I haven't been denied. And I think it's seen as a value. And I know it's working when my team asks for that leadership to be involved or that
Hmm.
leadership's input. I also have great feeling of success when people ask to borrow that person,
Hmm.
right? And say, hey, could this person facilitate this event? Or hey, what if we did cross-functional and this person led it? Then I
Hmm.
know they're getting the concept much broader in the business, and they understand the value of bringing teams together in a structured way to deliver a specific outcome, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's the other piece, right? Is, with the complexity, to be successful in service today requires, companies to break down a lot of these silos that have existed for a long time. So someone
Yes.
like that person is really good at, connecting dots, orchestrating, objectives toward the common goal, bringing, people together in a way that, you know, makes the breaking down of silos feel less like a, I don't power struggle or like
Yeah, or
competition
chore.
and
Yep.
more like, they see how it should work and then it
Yes.
becomes a more natural process,
Yeah, and
and
that
that's
person
really
is really
important.
important, though. That person, like who they are, because
Hmm.
even though they report to me, for example, they can't be an advocate for our team. That's not
Hmm.
their role. Their role is to facilitate, to bring people together, to solve a common mission, not to advocate for our team. The other people in the room that are the cross-functional part of the team that are my team can advocate for our team.
Right.
But that person has to kind of be this neutral party that's just
Hmm.
trying to help people problem solve together, right? And
Hmm.
I think I've seen that go wrong and I've seen that go really right. And there's a big difference. People know if they've been part of one or the other for sure.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point too. It's not someone you're sort of planting to infiltrate the
Right.
process and work toward your end game. You have to really believe in the process itself and trust
Yep.
them to be objective and, work toward the common good. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so Carrie, I always like to talk to women in service about their journeys.
Mhm.
Like you mentioned, you've worked for a number of organizations, and have, developed your career over years in spaces that, even today are still quite male dominated. What stands out to you about your journey, your experiences, kind of where things were when you started versus where
Mhm.
we are today versus, where we are going?
Yeah, it's an interesting question and something that I've reflected on more as I'm later in my career than I did early in my career. So to your point, I've always worked in manufacturing, which is very heavily male dominated just in general, and a lot of B2B also, which is again very male dominated. Now, when I started my career, I didn't like things like this weren't talked about as
Hmm.
openly, right? So there's a big difference in how we talk about these topics than 20, 25 years ago. So there were scenarios that I can look back on and I think, gosh, that was really hard because I was a female leader or I was a first time leader. But at the time, I didn't know that. I knew it was
Hmm.
hard, but I thought it was hard because I was young, or I thought it was hard because I didn't know how, or I thought it was hard because people were smarter than me. And I was a middle child. I was a single parent in college. I had a chip on my shoulder and a lot of things to prove. So I just thought things were hard for a variety of reasons, but it actually never dawned on me that, oh my gosh, it might be because I'm a female in a male dominated industry. That was like
Hmm.
beyond me. So
Yeah.
some of that ignorance was probably great. And some of
Hmm.
that ignorance probably really didn't help me figure out how to navigate things quicker in certain scenarios, right? What I would say is one of the places that I'm really proud of in manufacturing is seeing a lot more organizations acknowledge women and place women in high positions. So, for example, the Service Council, there's a female leadership lunch as part of, that organization's annual event, and they're bringing women leaders together, they're bringing relevant topics to the table, and there's an opportunity to connect with peers that wasn't even a thought, years
Hmm.
ago. And they're just one of many doing that, but it's a unique experience for other women, in these scenarios. What I would say we really need to work on still is just showing that it can be a career path. So I think when I was growing up in my career, a lot of times people that led service or support, they were a really good agent, then they got to be a supervisor, then they became a manager, then they were leading the team. And it was always this function that a lot of times was a female in customer service only. And
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of not done the way it's done today, right? So I remember thinking when I left one of the organizations, one of the vice presidents of operations said to me, like, I never knew the job could be done this way. Like, you changed my whole perspective on what this role is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a compliment to me, but I thought, gosh, like, who's been doing this job? You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like, this is a problem. But they had someone that grew up in the organization doing the job,
Yeah.
right? That didn't have those external experiences and they weren't treating it like a professional role and career. So I think that it's evolved in a lot of places, but I still think there's a lot of places that it is that customer service person that grew up and just kind of migrated into the role versus is really leading. And I think we need to show young people that this is a career and there is an opportunity and it can be really impactful and meaningful because there's
Mm-hmm.
not enough places that we're showing young people what that could look like to be able to influence people to come into this space, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I see a nice advancements towards people that are already there connecting, but not enough advancements in encouraging people to pick the path and
Yeah.
to, choose this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's definitely a challenge, is that exposure to people earlier on that, all of these different industries that exist that, ultimately keep the world running.
Yes.
That there are all these different career paths within those spaces. They're just not as easy to visualize as the typical, like, you could grow up and be a doctor, you could grow up and be a teacher,
Yeah.
you know what I mean,
Yeah.
and but there's so many options and so many opportunities, and we do need to figure out how do we show more of that so people can see that earlier on.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that we figured, like, I don't know if we're the right ones to figure it out because a lot of us fell into it, right? Like,
Hmm.
I fell into this. I never said I want to lead a service team or I want to be in support or customer experience. It's you're good at this, so you get picked for that. You do a good job at
Hmm.
that, it gets added to your bundle. This is fashionable. Hey, can you do this too? And it kind of stitches together what
Yeah.
becomes like your career and what fits in that organizational culture. And that's why I said sometimes there's a little more sales, sometimes there's a little more ops. So you can have a very meaningful career with a lot of variety, but you have to be open to, like, how would we talk about it as a career path? Because I think a lot of people like me didn't plan for it. It
Hmm.
happened to them, right?
Yeah.
Based on skill set.
Yeah. Yeah, same. And I think that is a shared experience of a lot of leaders that
Yeah.
have found themselves in this space, is that it was more serendipitous than it was intentional,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, which is really interesting. Now, as you've progressed in your own career, you have spent more time and energy mentoring women that are early in their careers. What is, like, the overarching theme, I guess, of advice that you're trying to give them, or wisdom that you're trying to impart on them?
Yeah, and I think it depends on the person's scenario, but I would say like one of the main things that, I kind of touch on repeatedly, it feels like regardless of who I'm in conversations with, is that your career doesn't always have to be vertical, right? So you might have to zigzag and get a little bit wider experience before you go upward, or
Hmm.
you may end up having a very meaningful career by going horizontal multiple times, and ending up a technical expert, for example. So I think like younger talent is really focused on how do I go straight up really fast? And there's only one way to do that. And I don't think that that's practical, nor do
Hmm.
I think it's reasonable, based on if they actually took some time and looked at all of our careers. There's a lot of things on paper that might not make sense. And it could be for personal reasons this happened, or it could be, an acquisition happened and this changed, or it could just be something in the business change that moved you around a little bit. And it didn't mean that you went up in level, but your basket changed. And
Mm-hmm.
that created a new opportunity for you. So I think it's be open to moves that could be horizontal, not just vertical, but it's also like asking for the job, even if you don't think you're ready.
Mm-hmm.
So there's tons of studies, that men will, put their name in the hat 10 times over versus women feeling like, well, I don't know all of that. And I think like we have to be better risk takers
Mm-hmm.
and we can say, well, it's a good question. I know, let me tell you all the things I could do and I don't know how to do this. That's true. But let me tell you why I have transferable skills that would fit that and be willing to take on a job that has some learning to it and
Mm-hmm.
not be afraid of that. And I haven't done a good job of that either, right? But so that's advice that I would tell myself to practice a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that curiosity, it's raising your hand, it's not being afraid to ask questions. And I feel like a lot of young talent and super young talent are, COVID kids and kids that didn't have good, internships and experiences got all kind of wrapped up in, different society things that were happening. And they didn't get some of those typical transition experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're afraid to do some of those things, or they suffer from more mental health challenges and they suffer from imposter syndrome and some of those things so much more extreme than maybe I did. And we've got to find ways to get past those and really put yourself out there and realize that everybody feels like this. And I was
Mm-hmm.
on a panel at Generac recently with some really great peers, and we were talking to an intern class. And one of the things, like all of us said in a different way, was we feel like that too. And we're vice
Mm-hmm.
presidents. It's okay. Like, I never
Yeah.
feel like the smartest person in the room. I always feel sometimes like, gosh, I don't know how I got in here. I don't belong, or I don't know what they're talking about. Like, that's not unique to being an intern or
Right.
being a first time manager or being a vice president for the first time, right? And we've got to be
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable and find those mentors and allies and support systems that will help us still take those risks, but do it in a cautious way that's gonna, you'll grow, but also carefully and, where you're comfortable, right?
Yeah, I think that's such an important point because, you know, just as you reflected back to early in your career, like you don't know what you don't know, right? So,
Yeah.
like you said, in some ways, and I that experience resonates with me because, I was in a similar situation where like I didn't necessarily realize at the time how much of what I was struggling with had to do with the fact that I was a woman in a very male dominated space. And so, my thoughts, opinions weren't necessarily welcome. But to your point, I wasn't connecting those dots at first. So it
Yeah.
was just like, oh, well, I shouldn't speak up because, I'm not as smart or I'm not as
Yes.
experienced. I'm too young. I'm too this, I'm too that. Right. And, you know, I love what you're saying because I think it's very important as we get more mature um, to remember to speak those truths out loud because those same insecurities, they're always going to be there, but you get to a point when you realize everyone has them, that they don't
Yes.
encumber you the same way that they once did. But
Yes.
as we get to that point, then you forget how important it is to own it for all the people that are going to hear that are where we were then. Because then
Yes.
they think like, oh my gosh, like Carrie's a VP and she just seems like she has it all together. I would have never thought she feels these things too. And there's
Yeah.
power in that. That's what starts to make them realize, like, okay, I'm not having these thoughts because it's me. I'm having these
Yeah.
thoughts because I'm human and it's normal to have these
Yes.
thoughts.
Yes.
It's a really powerful experience. That comfort level to be honest and vulnerable and share, and use some of that exposure therapy, that we've
Yes.
had just from life, to
Yeah.
kind of let people know, like, hey, yeah,
It's
speak up,
okay.
take
It's
some
okay
risks.
not to be
Everyone's
okay.
thinking the same things you're thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like when and I was listening to, some presentations by different young people in the business a month or so ago. And, one of the things we asked them is like, what did you like about this assignment or what was different than when you thought? And almost every one of them said they felt like uncomfortable or anxious or imposter. So like all these terms were coming up. And I remember walking out of there thinking, gosh, like they're already ahead being able to vocalize that
Mm-hmm.
and say it in a presentation in front of vice presidents. Like my generation we would feel it, but we would never say that.
Mm-hmm.
We would
You
have
would
never
just leave
exposed
thinking I don't
weakness.
belong here,
Yeah, you
or I'm
never
not
would have
cut out
said
for
that.
this, or
Yeah,
whatever.
you didn't
Yeah.
want someone to kick you out of the room and say,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you're right, you're not. Let's get you out
Right.
of here, right? Like there was this fear. Now it's so much more out there, which in some ways isn't great, in other ways is amazing
Mm-hmm.
because those conversations can be had that were never had,
Yeah.
and I always thought it was great to be a woman in a male dominated industry because there was only a few in the utility space and everybody knew who you were. So I thought, great, I have a platform that other people don't have. I never knew about the disadvantages until
Mm-hmm.
later. I thought, oh, shoot, that probably wasn't good or this wasn't good. I just didn't know. But now people are much more aware and there's more opportunities to get mentors and to get allies. And I've told young talent, like people will talk about themselves. People will spend time with you. We like to do that. Just
Mm-hmm.
ask, right?
Yeah.
Just ask, and I think that you'll be pleasantly surprised by what you get back from people that are later in their career is that's fun, right? And we're
Mm-hmm.
happy to share advice. Whether you take it or not, it's like up to you, but we're
Right.
happy to, help people, right? Because there were a lot of people that helped us. We just didn't have names for that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you're probably learning things along the way as well. I mean, that's
Yes,
the other thing that's
yes.
great about it is, you're gaining perspective. And, going back to our first best practice, right? You're observing, the minds and the thinking and the skills of these new people entering the workforce that helps you as a leader, you know, be able to, I don't want to say leverage them because that sounds
Yeah,
manipulative, but
yeah,
lead them most appropriately, right? So it's still kind of going back to that ongoing process of, listening and understanding and then figuring out how you take that understanding and, make the best use of it. So really good
yeah.
stuff.
I think it's all exciting, right? It's
Yeah.
progress, whether it's slow or fast. I don't think there's no progress,
Hmm.
so that's the good news.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a lot of exciting things happening in the space for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so, so much for coming
Yeah,
on and
thank you for
sharing
having
your
me.
insights. Yes, really appreciate it. You can find more by visiting the home of the Unscripted podcast at futureoffieldservice.com. The podcast is published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more at ifs.com. As always, thank you for listening.